A sightless war veteran stepped into the canine rescue facility, looking for a steady companion to help him navigate the dark. Fate, however, drew him straight to the cage holding the most volatile retired police dog on the books. They called the beast broken, violent, and a lost cause. But the moment the animal picked up his scent, the impossible unfolded. The aftermath left the whole staff speechless. Before we dive in, do me a favor, smash that subscribe button. And I've got to ask, where in the world are you tuning in from? Let me know in the comments below. It's amazing to see our global community grow. The rhythmic tapping of a cane announced his arrival down the silent corridor long before he came into view. Sergeant Ethan Walker, a man with a chest full of medals and 3 years of total darkness behind him, advanced with the cautious precision of a soldier. One hand trailed along the plaster for orientation, while the other went knuckle white around the grip of the staff that served as his eyes. The sharp smell of bleach mixed with steel and damp dog hair hit him, confirming he had arrived at the right destination. It took weeks of mental prep just to get here. Now his pulse was hammering harder than his boots against the floor. He'd survived firefights, night ops, and bomb blasts without flinching. Yet crossing this threshold felt infinitely more terrifying. Perhaps because the enemy wasn't external this time. He was battling the hollow void that trailed him back from the service. A gentle, grounded female voice broke his trance. "Mr. Walker, glad you could come. Welcome." Ethan gave a small nod and a weak grin. "Just Ethan, please." "Understood, Ethan," she answered softly. "I'm Karen. I'll be walking you through the assessment today. We've got a number of steady, disciplined animals lined up that might be a good match." His grip on the cane stiffened. "I don't need a perfect soldier," he whispered. "Just a soul that gets it." She paused, puzzled, but ushered him onward. As they ventured deeper, the cacophony of barking intensified, ricocheting off the industrial surfaces. Ethan tuned in, dissecting the noise. Panic, anxiety, joy, isolation. He realized these creatures were shouting the emotions people worked so hard to bury. Suddenly, a guttural, vicious growl tore through the air, followed by a bark so powerful it seemed to shake the very foundations of the kennels. Karen froze. "Moving on. That one is complicated." Ethan cocked his head, his attention snagged. "What's his story?" "Not an option for you," she dismissed rapidly. "Ex-police unit, severe trauma. He's in solitary. We should steer clear." But Ethan felt a magnetic tug, as if that deep rumble resonated with his own heartbeat. He heard agony in that sound. It was jagged, injured, and all too recognizable. He gulped, shoving down the flashbacks triggered by the noise. "It's okay," Karen soothed, misreading his reaction. "We'll keep you safe. Let's look at the mild-mannered ones built for service work." Ethan agreed, but a heavy feeling remained. While she steered him past the cages, he couldn't escape the sensation that destiny was lurking behind that ferocious bellow. A shattered soul that felt disturbingly like staring into a mirror his blind eyes could no longer use. She walked him down the extensive hallway, her heels clicking softly on the linoleum. Every metal grate they passed emitted a different frequency. Gentle whining, happy yaps, the scratch of claws on concrete. But that one specific cell, the source of the earlier roar, had gone dead quiet, as if the beast within was now tracking them. They skirted past a trio of staff members huddled near a utility closet, murmuring in hushed tones. Their words floated over, and Ethan's sharpened ears picked up everything. "Thor lost it again at dawn," one muttered. "Actually warped the steel bars." "Animal's a psychopath," another chimed in. "Belongs in total lockdown, nowhere near the adoptable ones. Boss won't authorize euthanasia, says it's inhumane, but nobody's volunteering to feed him." Karen coughed loudly to cut the chatter. "Guys, watch your volume, please." The staff straightened up as the pair passed, but the anxiety in their tone hung heavy. Ethan furrowed his brow. "Thor?" Karen paused. "Just a retired shepherd. Elite training, but currently a liability." Ethan didn't let it go. "Why? What broke him?" She sighed, weighing her words. "Thor was the best of the best once, Bomb sniffing, manhunts, takedowns, he did it all. But he snapped after his partner was killed in action. Her volume dropped. He turned volatile, territorial, sent 2 guys to the infirmary and almost shattered a caretaker's forearm. Ethan absorbed the story, a tight sensation gripping his sternum. He understood that kind of loss. He knew firsthand how trauma could warp a warrior into a ghost. "He's here because he's too dangerous to move," Karen went on. "He's a lost cause. Can't be trained, can't be homed. He barely lets us slide a bowl of food in." Ethan angled his face. "But he's still breathing," Karen confirmed with a nod. Before the trauma shattered his mind, that animal brought dozens of soldiers home alive. The brass decided that record bought him a permanent sanctuary here, however messy it gets. Ethan let the quiet stretch out. "I caught that sound earlier, that bark. It didn't strike me as anger." Karen hesitated before answering. "Ethan, with all due respect, Thor has tried to maul everyone who stepped within 10 feet of him since his handler was killed." To her, it was pure malice. But Ethan's gut told a different story. There was a texture to that growl, layers of agony and bewilderment. As they walked, Ethan felt the static in the air change. A low-frequency tremor traveled up through his soles, the heavy thud of paws stalking back and forth behind steel. Thor was aware of them, and he was ready. The walls seemed to close in as Karen steered Ethan toward the high-security block. The temperature seemed to drop, the air growing thick, as if the concrete itself held a grudge. The rhythmic tap of Ethan's cane cut through the tension. Then, the stillness exploded. A roar like tearing metal filled the corridor. Something massive threw itself against the enclosure, rattling the bars with terrifying power. Ethan went rigid, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He knew that sound. It was a hurricane of grief and raw power. Karen drew a sharp breath, clamping her hand onto Ethan's arm. "Thor, stand down!" The command meant nothing. The snarling redoubled, a wall of noise fueled by pure fury. Ethan couldn't see the creature, but the intensity painted a clear picture. Muscles bunched tight, teeth exposed, claws scrabbling for purchase on the cement. Staff scrambled. "Clear the area," one yelled. "Keep your distance from the grate," another ordered. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't fear gripping him. It was a magnetic pull. The bass of Thor's growl resonated in his chest, unearthing memories he'd tried to leave in the sand. Karen moved to shield him. "Stay back. He's lethal." But for a split second, the violence hiccuped. Between 2 savage outbursts, Ethan caught it. A sharp intake of air, a hesitation, the chaotic noise of confusion, a flash of recognition. Ethan cocked his head, planting his feet. Karen tugged at him. "No, he's escalating. We need to clear out, now." Ethan stood his ground. The bark came again, but the frequency had shifted. It wasn't just a threat anymore. It was a sob, wrapped in barbed wire. "That's not hatred," Ethan murmured, barely audible. Suddenly, Thor threw himself at the barrier again, a guttural roar shaking the foundations of the kennel. He reached for the sedative poles, anticipating a breach. Yet, Ethan took a step forward. Karen's grip turned frantic. "Ethan, freeze! He'll tear through that gate if he has to." Ethan didn't advance further, but he refused to retreat. He tuned out the chaos and tuned in to the animal. Thor was hyperventilating, desperate for air. Those claws weren't trying to kill. They were digging, scratching at the floor, as if trying to bridge a gap that couldn't be crossed. The storm broke abruptly. The only sound left was the heavy heave of lungs working overtime. Then came the sound that stopped everyone cold. The massive German shepherd let out a low, trembling whimper. Karen stared. The staff lowered their poles. That dog never whimpered. Ethan let out a long breath. Whatever that animal sensed behind Ethan's dark glasses, it had rattled him to the core. Karen's fingers dug into Ethan's sleeve as one final, uncertain bark bounced off the walls. The security team stayed tense, weapons ready, watching the unstable animal pace behind the wire. Thor's breathing was jagged, every exhale a rumbling threat. But the room knew the truth now. They had all heard that cry, a sound of vulnerability Thor hadn't made in years. Karen cleared her throat, trying to regain control.
We're leaving, Ethan. The service dogs are in the East Wing.
But Ethan remained anchored. He just listened to the restless movement, the uneven scrape of nails circling on concrete. A heavy energy hung between man and beast, raw, charged, familiar. A handler stepped up. "Sir, you need to walk away. It's not safe." Another chimed in. "Thor is a lifer. He's not up for adoption. Even the vets don't go near him unless it's an emergency." Karen nodded, her voice tight. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that. He's a radar for trauma. Fear, adrenaline, military bearing. He picks it up. Anything that smells like his old life triggers a meltdown." Ethan's jaw set hard. That wasn't a meltdown. He knew me. Karen paused, exasperated. "Ethan, Thor wants to kill everyone. It's random and it's dangerous. Don't read meaning into chaos." But Ethan shuffled a few inches closer, just enough to enter the dog's orbit. The frantic pacing ceased instantly. The silence that fell over the hallway was absolute. No snarl, no bark. Just two soldiers in the quiet. The animal stood frozen, chest heaving in a slow, jagged rhythm, eyes locked on Ethan. The handlers traded nervous glances. "What's his play?" "Beats me," one whispered. "He never just stalls out like that," another muttered. Karen tightened her grip on Ethan's arm, pulling him back. "Please, let's not indulge this. Thor is a ticking time bomb." She plastered a bright, artificial cheer over her anxiety. "Come on, Ethan. We have gentle souls waiting for you. Dogs that are housebroken, safe, and ready to love. You just need to meet them. Find the connection." Ethan cut in, voice barely a murmur. "And what if the connection is standing right here?" Karen went rigid. The staff recoiled, stunned into silence by the sheer absurdity of the question. "Ethan," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "Thor isn't an option. He's a liability." But the blind man just gave a slow, deliberate shake of his head. "Not to me." From the shadows of the cage, a low, thrumming noise emerged. Not malice, not a warning, but a frequency heavy with yearning, and that terrified the employees more than teeth ever could. The corridor felt suddenly claustrophobic as that mournful vibration filled the space. It wasn't a threat. It was miles from it. It was primal and confused, the sound of a creature caught in the crossfire between muscle memory and raw instinct. Ethan remained statue still, head cocked to the side, tuning in to the cadence of the breath drifting through the steel bars. "Why the pause?" a handler hissed. "No clue. Thor never glitched like this before," another murmured back. Karen scrambled to steer the narrative back to safety. "It's a fluke. He's probably just winded from all the aggression. Let's keep walking." But the dog wasn't tired. He was locked in. Ethan slid 1 foot forward, testing the water. The staff braced themselves, catch poles raised high. "Sir, hold it," one warned. "He'll tear you apart." Ethan simply raised a palm, a silent command for peace. If violence was on his mind, he wouldn't be waiting. Inside the cage, ears swiveled toward the calm timbre of Ethan's voice. The jagged panting smoothed out, shifting into quiet intrigue. Sight was lost to him, yet Ethan felt the weight of the gaze, piercing, heavy, and desperate for contact. He took a long, grounding breath. "We're the same." Karen let out a frustrated huff. "Ethan, stop. You're projecting. That dog reacts to anything with a pulse." "No," Ethan corrected softly. "He doesn't." The workers glanced at each other, uneasiness rippling through the group. They knew the truth. Thor was a weapon that had lost its safety switch. To everyone but this sightless stranger. Thor shuffled forward. The metallic chink of his heavy collar rang out against the concrete silence. He crept closer, then closer still. The handlers were paralyzed by dread, yet Ethan stood his ground, an anchor in the storm. The dog's respiration slowed, deepening into a rhythm of investigation. He angled his head, nostrils flaring, to decode the scent of a man who smelled like patience. Then, without a signal, a noise slipped out. A fragile, high-pitched whimper that bore no resemblance to the monster they had been battling minutes prior. Ethan's expression softened. Hear that? That isn't rage, it's remembrance. Karen looked completely lost. Remembrance of what? Ethan pressed a hand to his own heart. Agony. Abandonment. He knows what broken feels like. Karen faltered, her authority crumbling. Even if you're right, that doesn't make him a pet. Ethan shook his head again. It makes him seen. Thor closed the final distance, mashing his scarred snout against the cold iron grate. A shudder ran through the massive frame, not from fury, but from a vulnerability that hadn't surfaced since the day his world ended. A handler rubbed the back of his neck, whispering, "It's almost like he's picking him." Karen swallowed past the lump in her throat. Ethan, this connection, whatever is happening, it violates every protocol we have. Ethan gave a faint nod. I know, he whispered. It's messy. And that was precisely why leaving was no longer an option. He stood there, letting the silence settle, feeling the strange, invisible tether binding him to the beast behind the barrier. Thor stayed glued to the bars, inhaling deep drafts of air, as if Ethan's proximity was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. The staff had stopped breathing altogether. They were spectators to a miracle or a disaster, unable to look away. Finally, Ethan broke the spell. I need the truth about him. Karen tensed up. Ethan, his dossier is restricted. It's not standard procedure to— I don't want a report, Ethan interrupted gently. Just tell me the story. How did he end up this way? The air grew heavy. Even Thor seemed to still, listening to the cadence of the conversation. Karen looked at her colleagues, found no help there, and sighed. Okay, you have a right to know. But be warned, it's not a happy tale. Ethan waited, a pillar of calm. Karen lowered her voice. Thor was elite, K9 unit, one of the sharpest the force ever deployed. He spent 4 years with Officer Daniel Reeves. They weren't just partners, they were a single organism. It wasn't just duty. It was 1 year ago, Karen went on. A raid on a warehouse went sideways. An explosion ripped through the building. Daniel didn't make it. Thor walked away physically, but mentally, he stayed in that warehouse. When medics tried to separate him from Daniel, he snapped. He turned. Since that day, Karen's voice wavered. He's been a ghost, violent, unreachable, waiting for a command that's never coming. His partner died in the field. Karen nodded, the motion heavy with sorrow. And he blames himself. Dogs don't rationalize trauma the way humans do. They simply feel the loss and guard the wreckage. For Thor, that suffering became his entire world. Ethan swallowed, the sound sharp in the quiet. Ethan paused, letting the silence hang before he spoke, the memories dragging at his words. Because I was standing right there when the mortar took out my squad. I heard Karen's expression melted into sympathy. The staff lowered their gazes respectfully. Behind the steel mesh, Thor let out a low whimper, a vibration of pure empathy as if he parsed every syllable. Ethan drifted a hand toward the bars, halting it just a breath away from the metal. He isn't broken, Ethan breathed. He is mourning. Thor jammed his snout against the cold gate, shivering. And right then, Karen realized that a standard service animal would never touch the depth of a connection like this. The shepherd remained glued to the grate, his respiration ragged and slow, like he was fighting a war inside his own skull. Ethan stood his ground, separated from the massive beast by nothing but a thin line of steel and the smell of fear. The kennel staff watched, white-knuckled, paralyzed between the urge to jump in and the curiosity to see how this played out. Ethan angled his face toward Karen. I'm going in. The corridor exploded with noise. What? Absolutely not. Out of the question. He will maul you. You don't get it, Ethan. The dog is a ticking bomb. Ethan remained an anchor in the storm of protest. Karen moved closer, her voice shaking. Ethan, hear me out. Thor attacks anyone who enters his territory. No exceptions. I cannot authorize this. You saw the interaction, Ethan countered gently. He spared me. He made a choice. That's not reassurance, a handler argued. We don't gamble with a weapon like him. Ethan cocked his head, tuning into the rhythm of Thor's lungs. Heavy, but steady. He stopped pacing. The growling is gone. He is waiting for me. Open it. Karen shook her head, terrified. Ethan, I won't have your blood on my hands. Ethan placed a palm over his chest. You won't. I will. The staff traded anxious looks. Thor's tail gave a single twitch, not a wag, just a signal that he was tracking the escalating mood. Karen tried one last time, her tone brittle. Why are you so sure he won't strike? Ethan turned his sightless gaze toward the enclosure. Because agony recognizes agony. He senses I am not an enemy. From the shadows, a sound emerged, halfway between a menace and a cry for help. After a long, shuddering exhale, Karen nodded to the lead trainer. Crack the safety latch, but keep the sedatives aimed. If he jumps, he won't, Ethan cut in. The heavy bolt slid back with a harsh clank. The team braced themselves, forming a jagged semicircle around the entry point. Ethan moved across the threshold, feeling the atmosphere density change. Thor went rigid, his muscles snapping tight like violin strings. Hold it, the trainer barked, pole raised. Ethan paid no mind. He raised an empty hand, palm exposed, broadcasting peace. A rumbling warning vibrated from the dog's chest, confused. Ethan spoke into the space. It is all right, soldier. I am not here to take his place. I just want to understand. The growl fractured. A pause, a shiver, a tentative step. It wasn't violence. It was identification. The air in the kennel grew thick, heavy with something primal. Instinct, history, sorrow. The staff stood like statues, tranquilizer darts poised but wavering. Karen watched, suspended between terror and wonder, as Ethan sank to one knee, syncing his movements to the dog's breath. The shepherd was a statue of tension, power coiled beneath that black and tan coat. His eyes, wild, fierce, bewildered, drilled into Ethan with absolute fixation. A deep rumble rolled through his ribs, but the malice was gone. It sounded like heartbreak. Ethan didn't blink. Steady now. I am right here. Thor closed the distance, planting one heavy paw after another. Claws clicked on the cement. Measured, deliberate beats, not the frantic charge everyone anticipated. Ethan kept his hand out, fingers loose. Karen whispered to her colleague, "Why isn't he tearing him apart?" "Beats me. He should have struck by now." The rumble faded as the dog leaned in to investigate the offering of Ethan's hand. First the knuckles, then the pulse point, then the fabric of his coat. The sniffing grew rapid, urgent. He buried his snout, inhaling with desperate focus. Ethan's brow creased. He is tracking a scent. Suddenly, Thor snapped his head up, eyes blown wide. He pushed in until his nose hovered over Ethan's heart, taking a sharp, deep pull of air. The noise that tore out of his throat wasn't a threat. It was a strangled, high-pitched cry, the sound of a creature haunted by memories he couldn't outrun. Karen stared, completely thrown off guard. What is he doing? Ethan's fingers brushed the rough fabric of his jacket, right where the dog's nose was working overtime. "It's this old vest," he said, voice barely audible. "A guy in my squad used to wear it. I held on to it after the blast." Thor let out another shaky whimper, pressing his snout into Ethan's chest with a heartbreaking tenderness, as if he'd found a ghost trapped in the weave. It was the smell of the war zone, the specific scent of a brother in arms, an aroma soaked in tragedy. A handler nearby murmured, their voice thick with sudden emotion. Good Lord, he thinks Ethan knows his old partner. Ethan could feel the dog's hot breath fanning across his skin, the animal's massive frame shuddering against him. With agonizing slowness, Thor dipped his head, resting it heavily on Ethan's shoulder. The entire kennel went dead quiet. The aggression evaporated. leaving only two broken things leaning on each other for support. Ethan's trembling fingers found the thick fur of the dog's neck. "I've got you," he whispered. "You aren't doing this alone." Thor's eyelids fluttered shut. It was the first moment since the loss of his handler that he lowered his guard enough to let someone in. The great weight of his head remained on Ethan's shoulder as the shaking subsided, giving way to a long, shuddering exhale of pure relief. Ethan kept his hand steady on the dog's neck. For a split second, the rest of the world just faded away. The cages on the concrete vanished, leaving only two survivors acknowledging each other's scars. The moment fractured when a harsh voice sliced through the air. "What in God's name is happening?" Heads snapped toward the door. It was the director. Mr. Halverson, a man known for zero tolerance and rigid rules, marched into the space. He stopped dead, staring. The facility's most volatile animal wasn't tearing a throat out. He was cuddling up to a civilian stranger. "Explain this immediately," he barked, panic edging his tone. "Who unlocked that gate? And why is there a visually impaired man in the enclosure?" Karen rushed to intervene. "Sir, please. It's not what it looks like." He wasn't aggressive. Halverson cut her off. "Don't be naive. That animal is a ticking time bomb. He's unstable. Nobody goes near him, certainly not someone who can't see the attack coming." Thor's head snapped up, a deep, resonant rumble starting in his throat. He shifted his weight, placing his body between Ethan and the newcomer, muscles coiled tight. Halverson pointed an accusing finger. "See that? He's winding up to strike." "No," Ethan corrected, his voice even. "He's standing guard." "Guarding you?" Halverson let out a harsh laugh. "He's hospitalized professionals. He almost ripped a staff member apart last week. He's a lost cause." Ethan slowly rose to his feet, keeping a grounding hand on the dog. "He picked up a scent from my service days. He didn't lash out. He connected. Just give him a shot." Halverson's expression was stone. "Out of the question. That dog is a walking lawsuit. I cannot authorize an adoption for him. Ever." Karen tried again, keeping her voice level. "Sir, respectfully, we've never seen him respond like this." Halverson put up a hand to silence her. "I said enough. The dog stays put, period." Thor picked up on the spiking adrenaline. The hackles on his spine stood up, tail rigid, claws digging into the concrete. A low vibration started in his chest again, not malice, but panic. He was terrified of losing the first connection he'd made in 12 months. Halverson gestured to the staff. "Get Mr. Walker out of that enclosure, now." As the team moved in, Thor lunged forward to block their path, snarling. Ethan stroked his flank. "Easy now." But he could feel the energy radiating off the animal. This wasn't disobedience. It was a desperate refusal to be abandoned again. The staff paused, eyeing the director nervously, while Thor solidified himself as a barrier between Ethan and the world. He stood immovable, a fortress of muscle and raw instinct. Halverson didn't flinch. "Prep the sedatives. Contain that animal." "No!" Ethan yelled, stepping forward with sudden intensity. Thor mirrored the movement, jamming his side against Ethan's legs, lips curled back to reveal gleaming teeth at the approaching men. Halverson glared. "Case in point. He's lethal." Karen moved to intercept. "Sir, stop pushing. He's only reacting to the threat you're introducing." Halverson acted like she wasn't there. "Remove the civilian." Two handlers inched closer. Thor's growl became a seismic rumble you could feel through your shoes. His ribs heaved, breath coming in sharp gasps, shaking with the absolute terror of separation. Ethan dropped to one knee, voice low. "I'm here, buddy. I'm right here." Thor's wild, panicked eyes fixed on Ethan's unseeing face. The handlers thrust the catch-poles forward, and Thor snapped. Jaws clamping not on flesh, but on the metal rod coming for him. Teeth clashed against steel with a jarring ring as he thrashed his head. The staff scrambled backward in a chaotic retreat. "We've lost control of him," a handler screamed over the din. "Get Walker out of there, immediately," Halverson commanded. Karen's fingers dug into Ethan's bicep. "Ethan, you have to move," she pleaded. "If you stay, they'll tranquilize him, or worse." He froze, feeling the tremors rolling off the dog's body under his palm. A staff member tried to intervene with a catch-pole, but Thor snapped, jaws clamping shut dangerously close to the man's wrist. "I can't just abandon him," Ethan choked out, his voice cracking. "I know," Karen replied, her tone barely audible. "But right now, he thinks he's protecting you. As long as you're standing here, he'll keep fighting them." Reluctantly, Ethan straightened his back. A guttural, shattered whine escaped the dog's throat. Thor leaned his weight against Ethan's shins, pleading with his whole body. Ethan dropped to one knee again, framing the massive head in his hands. "I'm not leaving you for good," he whispered. "I promise." The dog keened, shoving his nose against Ethan, desperate to maintain contact. Karen pulled gently at his sleeve. Ethan forced himself to back away. The second he cleared the doorway, the shift in the animal was instant. Ears flattened against his skull. Breathing became erratic. Eyes rolled back in panic. Then, absolute chaos took over. He launched himself at the containment mesh, a whirlwind of muscle and fury. Colliding with the metal so hard, the entire cage shuddered. Shouts erupted from the staff. Karen sucked in a sharp breath. Halverson muttered a curse under his breath. It wasn't aggression. It was pure devastation. He was tearing himself apart because his only anchor had just walked away. The sounds of the dog's distress were still bouncing off the walls when a piercing siren sliced through the air, drowning out everything else. Strobing red lights washed over the concrete, plunging the hallway into a chaotic rhythm of crimson shadows. Karen whipped around. "What is that?" someone yelled from the far end of the corridor. "Fire in C-Wing. Smoke confirmed. Everyone out, now." Pandemonium broke loose as staff scrambled for the exits. Automatic doors crashed closed while workers rushed to clear the cages. Then came the scent, acrid and undeniable. It hit the back of the throat like poison. Karen gripped Ethan tight. "We need to move, Ethan, right now." He planted his feet. "Thor is trapped back there," a worker yelled through a coughing fit as gray haze started rolling in. "Systems are locked down. He's unreachable." Hearing that, Ethan's stomach dropped. He could see it in his mind. The dog, alone in the dark, scared out of his mind. It triggered an old wound in Ethan, a visceral ache he knew too well. Karen tugged harder. "The fire crew will handle it. Come on." "Wait for them?" Ethan snapped back. "He'll be dead by then." A boom shook the floorboards as flames blew out a ventilation duct nearby. Fire climbed the walls, radiating intense heat. "Go, everyone out," Halverson commanded, pushing people toward safety. Ethan jammed his white cane against the linoleum. "I am not leaving him behind." Karen's voice shook. "Ethan, you're blind." "You won't make it in this smoke." He shook his head. "He'll guide me." Before she could stop him, he pivoted and sprinted straight into the haze. Someone tried to tackle him, but he dodged, moving on pure adrenaline and muscle memory. "Ethan!" Karen screamed. He ignored her. Deep inside the burning wing, Thor was frantically throwing himself against the enclosure. Fumes flooded his space, and he battered the bars, barking until his throat was raw. Nails scratched uselessly on metal. Abandoned. Again. It felt like the end. "Thor!" Ethan bellowed into the gloom. Above the roar of the blaze, a sharp, desperate bark answered him. He tracked the sound, his cane clattering frantically against the floor tiles to find a path. His chest burned with every breath. The heat was suffocating. "Keep talking to me," he screamed, coughing. "I'm on my way." The barking intensified, acting like a sonic lighthouse. Even in his blindness, Ethan was absolutely sure of one thing. That wasn't a monster in a cage. It was a friend crying out for help. He pushed further into the inferno, the air growing heavier and deadlier with every step. Each breath seared his throat. Even sightless eyes watered from the stinging fumes. He swept his cane back and forth, desperate for orientation amidst the deafening roar. Then he heard it, that specific bark, piercing the chaos like a tether. He veered toward the noise, stumbling until the tip of his cane hit masonry. He ran a hand along the surface, feeling the reverberation of the dog throwing his weight against the barrier.
"I got you, buddy," Ethan yelled.
"I'm right here," Thor yelped, scrabbling at the door, sensing salvation. He knew Ethan was within reach. Hope surged back. Ethan felt his way down the wall until his fingers brushed hot steel. The latch was searing to the touch. The mechanism was damaged, but jammed tight. "Just a second," he gasped, hacking up smoke. "I'm getting you out." He bundled his sleeve over his palm, gripped the scorching metal, and pulled with everything he had left. The metal refused to give an inch. Toxic gray fumes burned his lungs, choking him. He threw his weight against it again, harder this time. Still nothing. From inside the kennel, Thor was going berserk, slamming his heavy frame into the grate. Again, Ethan wheezed through the heat. "Come on, hit it!" The dog launched himself at the barrier. Ethan yanked on the latch, straining every muscle fiber until... snap. The heat-stressed metal finally gave way. The gate swung wide, and Thor shot out of the haze like a cannonball, his momentum sending Ethan sprawling. But there were no teeth, no malice. The shepherd was all over him, frantic circles, nose bumping his ribs, desperate whines. Rough tongue against soot-stained skin, checking, verifying. "You came back," Ethan hacked, fingers burying themselves in the dog's thick coat. "Good boy, I've got you." A support timber shattered nearby, sending sparks raining down. Thor gave a single commanding bark and took the lead. He wedged his shoulder firmly against Ethan's leg, physically steering him away from the inferno. The washout, the liability. He was Ethan's lifeline now. With supernatural focus, Thor navigated the burning corridor, weaving them through the falling wreckage. Whenever Ethan stumbled or swayed from the smoke, the dog was there, a solid anchor propping him up. They rounded the bend seconds before the ceiling behind them disintegrated into a sheet of fire. Wood splintered, embers erupted like fireworks. "Move, buddy," Ethan choked out. "I'm right here." Thor yipped, pulling him onward until the sweet, cool shock of night air slapped Ethan's face. Thor practically hauled him across the threshold, delivering him straight to the stunned crew waiting outside. The beast everyone wanted to put down had just rescued the only man who tried to lift him up. As they stumbled onto the grass, the scene erupted into chaos. First responders rushing in, yelling over the deafening roar of the blaze. Above them, the night sky was choking on thick, oily plumes. Blue lights flashed and sirens screamed, but the dog tuned it all out. He didn't care about the commotion or the strangers. His world had narrowed down to one person. Ethan's legs gave out. He hit the dirt, hacking violently as his starved lungs greedily sucked in the oxygen. In a heartbeat, Thor was glued to his side. His ears were flat, tail tucked, pure, unadulterated worry. The dog was panting hard, ribs heaving, but his gaze was laser-locked on Ethan's eyes. A medic sprinted over with a kit. "Let's get a mask on him." As the medic reached out, a low rumble vibrated in Thor's throat, and he blocked the path. "It's all right," Ethan rasped, hand finding the dog's skull. "He's a friend." The medic paused, eyes wide as he recognized the animal. "Sir, isn't that the canine unit you said was a loaded weapon?" A faint, soot-covered grin tugged at Ethan's mouth. "That weapon just saved my life." Thor dipped his snout, bumping Ethan's elbow hard. A clear reprimand for the scare. Around them, the fire crew worked in a frenzy of hoses and radio chatter. Another section of the roof gave way with a thunderous boom. The civilians jumped. The dog didn't even blink. He remained a statue pressed against Ethan, vibrating with adrenaline but immovable. Then Karen broke through the line, tears cutting tracks through the soot on her cheeks. "Ethan, you made it out!" She dropped to her knees, hand reaching for his shoulder. "I thought you were gone." A warning growl rippled through Thor, guards up. "Stand down," Ethan murmured softly. "She's family." The tension drained from the dog's shoulders, though his eyes remained watchful. Karen pressed a palm to her chest, stunned. "I have never seen him act like this. He doesn't let anyone get this close." Ethan ran his fingers through the coarse fur, feeling the hammer rhythm of the dog's heart. He didn't pull me out because of his training. He did it because he couldn't stand to be left behind again. The medic returned, this time approaching slowly with the oxygen tank. No growl this time. Thor just watched with intense anxiety as the mask went on. He spun in tight, nervous circles, his tail sweeping the dirt in agitated arcs. He couldn't go more than 5 seconds without jamming his nose into Ethan's shoulder, needing that tactile proof of life. Easy now, Ethan mumbled through the plastic. I'm right here. But the dog wasn't buying it. He was shivering violently now, the adrenaline crash and smoke inhalation taking their toll. His back legs were shaking. Still, he wouldn't collapse. He wouldn't close his eyes. He wouldn't give an inch of space. Karen watched, voice barely audible. He's claimed you, Ethan. Body and soul. Thor leaned his full weight against Ethan's leg again, spent, shaking, but unbroken. And suddenly, everyone standing there understood. He wasn't a hazard anymore. He was a guardian who had finally found something worth guarding. The rehab wing was being eaten alive by the fire, but Thor just kept pressing into Ethan, oblivious to the destruction of his cage. Everything else was just noise and confusion. Between the falling timber and the shouting, it was madness. But Thor's focus never wavered. Then Halvorsen shoved his way through the perimeter, face flushed with heat and anger. "Have you lost your mind?" he barked. "You could have killed yourself, both of you." The director choked on his next word. Thor had turned, fixing his gaze directly on the man. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a challenge. It was a look of desperate exhaustion that screamed, "Do not separate us." Halvorsen went still. Karen interposed herself, voice shaking but firm. "Sir, that dog saved him. He led Ethan out of the fire. He did a better job than any fully trained service animal." Halvorsen shook his head, looking from the wreckage to the pair, trying to make the math work. "No, Thor is volatile. He doesn't connect. He's a liability." Ethan pulled the plastic mask away from his face, his voice raspy but rock solid. "You're reading it wrong. That isn't aggression. That is grief. He finally found a human who speaks his language." Thor leaned his full weight against Ethan's leg, a silent, physical punctuation to the statement. Nearby, a handler nursed a bruised forearm, watching warily. "Boss, listen. When Ethan was trapped in that inferno, we couldn't get within 10 feet of the animal. He wasn't lashing out blindly. He was running protection detail." Another voice chimed in. "I have never seen a canine move like that. He was weaving through falling beams and debris like smoke. He positioned himself to take the hits so Ethan wouldn't have to." Karen stepped forward, voice steady. "Chief, that's not an accident. That is a lifeline." Halvorsen scanned the room. Every face, medics, crew, fire staff, mirrored the same disbelief. They weren't looking at a beast. They were looking at a miracle. His gaze landed on Thor. The dog's legs finally buckled, adrenaline fading, and he collapsed against Ethan's lap, looking terrified that if he closed his eyes, his person might disappear. Ethan buried his hands in the rough fur behind the dog's ears. He doesn't belong in a kennel. He needs a front door. He needs a home. Halvorsen's jaw worked, the tension visible. "Ethan, look, I can't. The dog has a rap sheet. The liability alone." Thor lifted his head, letting out a noise that stopped the room cold. It wasn't a growl. It was a whimper, broken, raw, and desperate. It was the sound of a creature begging for his life. Halvorsen actually flinched. Karen's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the silence. "Sir, don't end his story here. Let him live." The chief let out a long, ragged breath, the fight draining out of him. "All right," he murmured. "You win. Take him." The tension in Ethan's frame snapped, his shoulders dropping inches. Thor didn't bark. He just pushed his forehead hard against Ethan's sternum, grounding himself. The war was over. When Ethan walked out of the rehab center the next dawn, the air tasted different, sharper, cleaner. The blaze was out, the ruined wing cordoned off with yellow tape. Crews were already scraping away the charred remains with heavy loaders, the noise distant and dull. But amidst the wreckage, something whole had survived. Thor was right there at his knee. No lead, no commands, just an invisible tether of absolute trust. Every step cost the dog effort, lungs still raspy from the smoke, but he refused to drift more than an inch from Ethan's leg. Every few yards, a wet nose bumped Ethan's palm. A tactile check-in. You're still here. We're still here. Ethan's fingers drifted through the coarse coat in response, a faint smile touching his lips. Behind them, footsteps crunched on gravel. "Ethan, hold up!" "The paperwork," Karen huffed, catching her breath. Ethan smirked. "Thought I signed those yesterday." "Not these ones," she said. "Had to read Halverson's orders. The status isn't dangerous anymore. It reads, hero." Thor's ears swiveled at her voice, and he offered a soft, acknowledging huff. Karen's expression melted. "You're going to be good for him, Ethan." He shook his head slowly. "No, he's the one saving me. We figure it out together." They hit the asphalt of the parking lot just as the wind picked up, rustling the oaks. Thor's time blurred, settling into a quiet, steady rhythm over the next few weeks. Ethan didn't train Thor like a service dog. He treated him like a partner. It wasn't about dominance, it was about dialogue. They worked. Thor learned to read the shifts in Ethan's balance, leaning his solid weight against Ethan's calf to steer him clear of uneven pavement or obstacles. The change was profound. The unadoptable beast that handlers feared now sat like a statue while toddlers stumbled past him in the grass. Mothers would hover, nervous at first, until they saw the profound stillness in the dog's posture, a gentle sentinel watching the world. Ethan would just laugh when people asked, "He's a working dog, ma'am. He just needed a job that mattered." Nights were different, too. Thor refused the dog bed. He slept on the floor by the mattress, waiting until Ethan's breathing evened out before closing his own eyes. In the insomnia hours, Ethan would drop a hand over the side of the bed. Thor would let out a long, heavy sigh, the sound of a soldier finally laying down his armor. Karen swung by one afternoon. The dog that greeted her wasn't the rigid weapon she remembered. He was a goofball, tail thumping a rhythm against the doorframe. "I don't even recognize him," she said, stunned. "He looks peaceful." "He is," Ethan replied. "He's back on duty. He's got a principal to protect. That's all he ever wanted." Karen studied Ethan's face. "And what about you?" Ethan paused, looking down. "I've got a reason to get out of bed." Thor, catching the vibration of his name, trotted over and rested his heavy head on Ethan's knee. A silent vow. Months down the line, an envelope arrived. An invite to the precinct for a formal commendation. The uniform rank and file stood at attention as the pair walked the aisle. The chief spoke about grit, loyalty, and the things that tie a man to his dog. "Technically, he's retired," the chief's voice boomed. "But you don't retire a spirit like that. He saved a life not because he was commanded to, but because he chose to. That's not training. That's love." Thor sat beside Ethan, chest out, ears pricked forward, soaking in the energy of the room. He wasn't a liability anymore. He wasn't a broken tool. He was a guardian, a survivor. And finally, he was home. Ethan let his hand sink into the coarse fur along Thor's spine. "Thank you," he murmured, a quiet confession that the dog had found him precisely when he was most lost. Thor leaned his heavy frame into Ethan's side, eyes fluttering shut. The roar of the audience and the pop of camera flashes faded into the background as a heavy realization settled in Ethan's chest. He wasn't the hero who saved the beast. The beast was the one who saved him. They were done being defined by their broken pasts. This was the first breath of a second chance.